EC, in going back over years to birth date, minus 1931, a change minus 1919, another change minus 1895, independent body. Yes, we have the entity and those records of the relations with the universe and universal forces of that entity now called 189. In giving the interpretations of those influences and the experience of this entity, these as we find in the astrological and the earthly sojourn make for urges latent and manifested that may be summed up as these, but without respect of will or the applications that have been made in the present experience, one of high mental capacities, and tending towards the masculine mind, not in manner or mean but in thought, yet patient, persevering, and a latent and manifested tendency towards the arts as well as towards executive abilities, tempered ever with a seeking for the higher, more ennobling influences that are the criterions for a spiritual life. These we find latent and manifested, and from the astrological and the earthly sojourns we may draw conclusions as to why these are latent and manifested urges in the experience of the entity now called 189. In the astrological aspects we find Jupiter, Venus adverse, Mars in relationships with Jupiter, adverse with Saturn. Hence little or few changes should be made in the experience of the entity, though, as a matter of fact, many have been made in the present sojourn. Again we may see the influences from the earthly sojourns that activated these influences in the experience of the entity. Jupiter has made for not only the high ennobling influence but the tendency for relationships that deal with large numbers of peoples. Being in an adverse position to Venus makes for those innate and manifested forces of the entity making for self a career in the business or associated activities in the experience. Not that there are not latent urges for the home building, but these, as has been indicated, have been rather, and are, from the astrological aspects, adverse rather than benevolent. The benevolent forces come then rather with the relationships to others, to the groups, to the masses, than with individuals. Though the body finds friendships and relationships from under adverse conditions, and of those adverse influences in the experience of the entity in relationships to individuals, bringing the entity closer to those paternal instincts, those activities for friendships, those activities for long-suffering even in its relationships to individuals or peoples. In Saturn we find many individual projects, individual activities coming to the experience of the entity. Hence constantly there has been held before the entity oft the prospects which in a material way or in a social or financial way would become more helpful in influence. Yet these have more often than otherwise, not materialized to their full extent. Yet as the entity has learned and has learned patience, long-suffering, not in a sense of duty, but in a sense of opportunity for soul development, greater has been and will be the peace, the harmony, those influences that will bring the greater soul development. For these influences are a portion of the experience of every entity entering or passing through the earth's plane. The earthly sojourns make for rather the innate and manifested urges that come from the emotional forces of the body, while the astrological sojourns make for rather the mental urges. Then we find that the earthly sojourns become the emotional forces that often the experience of this entity have produced, or have proven to be, those experiences where the little hurts have come from the indifference of those whom the entity has in its goodness of grace aided. Hence these have brought discouragements and wonderments at times. But there should ever be the knowledge in the experience of the entity that bread cast upon the waters will return in due season, and that to be in a material world a light of goodness, as is exemplified in the hope of the eternal and the divine that is innate in the experience of every soul, becomes the growth in the soul development in material sojourns. Before this, then, we find the entity living in the earth during those periods when there were wars in the land of the present nativity, in and about the city or town then in which the entity was born in the present, during those periods called the American Revolution. The entity suffered in body as well as in mental conditions owing to hardships brought on by activities about the entity. For while the entity in the material world was among those that were free from want and care, the ideals that were a portion of the entity's experience, in its allegiance and its holding to the crown, made for mental hardships in the experiences during that period. Then the entity was associated materially with many who have been in the acquaintance and in the friendships of the entity in the present sojourn, and much as may be indicated by such association has to be worked out by all. For in the experiences or sojourns an entity is constantly meeting itself. For what ye sow, so do ye reap, or that indeed ye reap. And with what measure ye meet it is measured to you again. Then in the name Charlotte Brontë, the entity gained and lost and gained. For during those periods of trials in the latter portion there came a greater understanding, when there was the gaining of the better knowledge as to what freedom indeed is in the experience. Hence the latent urge to the entity is not domination but dominated, and the sense that force and power must eventually from the material source override. This must be put away. It has been, it is at times. At others, power of influence, power of those that are the mediums of exchange in fame or fortune, becomes as a ruling influence. But all power, all force, arises from one source, and those that have same are only lended same by an all-wise and merciful Creator as talents to be used in his vineyard. For each entity, each soul, is his brother's keeper. Before that we find the entity was in the land now called English, during those periods when there were the changes in ideals, as that represented by the holy wars, and the periods when there were those activities and gatherings of those who went upon those missions that the more oft proved to be as ideas rather than ideals. The entity in that experience or sojourn was in the man, and leaving the home, making for material burdens, and yet looking for that of power through an idea that was set rather as a criterion than as the teachings that prompted same. For the force of fame, the force of an idea, overrode. Then in the name Edmund, though ordinarily bacheled, the entity made for material gains, but spiritual and mental losses, through the tendency to become dominant and dominating by the force of mere strength. Hence those latent and innate urges for the capacities for man's work, for man's abilities, arise from those experiences or sojourns. These are good if used properly, for all must pass under the rod, or under the experiences of every form of activity in the material world as to place, position, sex, and the abilities for the use or application of material gains. Before that we find the entity was in the promised land, during those periods when there was the returning of those peoples of promise from exile, in the rebuilding of the walls, in the redecorations of the temple, in the beginnings of again establishing the law as was given by the leader of the entity's peoples. The entity then was with those peoples of Nehemiah, but of the household of those close to Zerubbabel, and of the tribes of the Levite peoples. Hence with the journeying of Zerubbabel, the entity was too young, and in the inclination for the associations. Because of the lack, the entity later came as one well fitted for decorations. Hence the entity's activities in the present may be found in that field of interior decoration, or the weaving of cloth or brocades, or the making of draperies and hangings and the like. These things should be part of the entity's experience. For in same the entity finds an answering to that something within which was the period of such great gain in the entity's experience then. The name then was Hanaha, but of its present sex, though name might indicate otherwise. However, the name was given rather because of the abilities of the entity to compete with, to cope with, the best of the men workers in such during the experience. The entity gained throughout, for then there was the interpreting and the application of the law, even under those hardships materially that the entity laboured to interpret the law. Later the entity was an aid to Ezra, the scribe, and to those who made for the readjusting or interpreting of the law into the language of the day. Again we find the entity then given them those things as pertain to the interpreting of language, or the speech of many varied peoples. And the abilities are latent, and may be made manifest by the ever-turning within. For how hath it been given to those that seek to know the Lord? Thy God is one. Look not for those who may bring the message from abroad, or those who may descend from the heavens to bring word again, but rather into thine own heart. For there he hath promised to meet all. Hence is the entity gained during those experiences, in the land of promise, so may it be applied in the present sojourn. As to material things, those that have to do with decoration of the home or of the abode, that represents in the present the own temple or castle of the individual groups, or in the interpretation of the law, should be the fields of the entity. For as the Lord thy God is one, so is the law under which, through which, one attains fellowship as one with him. Before that we find the entity was in the land now called the Egyptian, when there were the emissaries that were being sent for the various activities to aid those that were attempting to correlate the messages of the teachers of the period. The entity then was one of those who aided in correlating that as related to the development of what in the present is called hospitalization, or the need for individual care, and how that during such and in such not only is the body preserved but the mind and the spiritual relationships. Hence the natural inclinations and the experiences of the entity in the present towards things pertaining to same, and the drawing close to same, and the innate abilities to offer aid when emergencies arise in the associations of the entity at any time. During that experience the entity's name was changed. For the entity was first of the peoples of the natives, who followed close with that native, who made for the rebellion, and of those that were pitted against the young king. Later with the re-establishing, the entity's name was changed to Estiel. In the experience the entity gained, lost, gained, as may be indicated by the varied activities of the entity during the experience. As to the abilities of the entity in the present, then, and that to which it may attain, and how, first, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman not ashamed, rightly divining, or dividing, the words of truth. That is, giving proper evaluations to the material, the mental and the spiritual relationships, the economic, the social, the orders of things in their proper form. Be not hasty in decisions, but know that the answers may come from within. In the fields of activity as indicated, in the associations of that as has been outlined may the greater expression be made. Keep self unspotted from the world of thine own consciousness, condemning none, and most of all not self. God loveth the cheerful giver. Ready for questions. Q. What can the empty do to sharpen her memory of names, directions, people? A. As has been indicated, as during the experiences of the entity much of these very factors became a part, associate same with places, conditions, circumstances. Just as one has read, and as the entity did in its interpreting of the law, and in its aid to make same read as it were, individuals are experiences, are places, as well as individuals. So in sharpening the memory, the associations of same with places, dates, times, make for the drawing as it were of the whole picture. Q is the entity's present association with Mr. 257, a good one for her development mentally, spiritually and financially? A good one. For as has been indicated, many things are to be worked out. Remember, fame and fortune and power are not the rule, but sincerity, patience, kindness, long-suffering, gentleness. Against these there is no law, for it is the law of love, knowledge, of wisdom. Hence in the associations not only self may be aided, but those about self may be helped also, if these words of wisdom, of patience, of long-suffering, are made a part of the efficiency to serve. Q. How can she broaden her social life? A. In the same way and manner. Be a source of knowledge to all, and this attracts those not only whom the entity may help but who may aid the entity in all fields of activity that have to do with mental, material and spiritual development. Q. Why is it so difficult for her to let herself enjoy life? A. Read that which has been given. It will be seen innately. Q. What will bring back the entity's zest and the love of life? A. Engaging in, and aiding others in, same. Q. Considering present activities, how can the entity broaden her intellect? A. As given, by studying to show thyself approved unto the law thou hast set, or aided in setting, for many, in the interpretation of same. Not as law in the letter of same, rather, as has been indicated, in the application of the spirit of same. Q. What can the entity do to develop charm of character and personality? A. It has been given. Studying to show thyself approved. For they that be upon the Lord's side have nothing to fear, and have charm, personality, life, living as an ever effervescing, as an ever bubbling over in the experience with others. Q. How can the entity overcome her superficial approach to most subjects? A. These questions may all be answered in the one. In studying to show self-approved. For the approval must be in self as to its relationship to its ideal. What then is thy ideal? Is it founded in material things, material gains, as it were in those experiences of the period when as Edmund thou didst rule? Or is it founded rather as in those periods when as Hanaha thou didst give to others that which is the basis for hope, for faith, for judgments in self, for wisdom, for knowledge? We are through for the present.